In April of 2021, the small city of Shilinhot in Inner Mongolia became the setting for a crime so twisted it defied comprehension. 4 people murdered within days of each other, with no apparent motive connecting their deaths beyond family ties. As alarm spread through the grassland community, investigators found themselves pursuing a mind-bending case where nothing was as it initially appeared. Early that month, 25-year-old Wang Jing was focused on her upcoming wedding. She and her fiancé, 27-year-old Jiang Lin, had nearly finished renovating their new apartment, and invitations were ready to be sent. For Wang Jing, marriage meant building the kind of home she'd grown up in, one filled with children who would create joyful memories of their own. That sense of anticipation abruptly dimmed when her father, Wang Muzhong, we'll call him Mr. Wang, failed to return from a business meeting. Known around town for his construction work and straightforward manner, he was the kind of man who rarely deviated from his routine. By late evening, when he still hadn't come home or answered his phone, unease took hold. His wife, 52-year-old Jiang Muhua, we'll refer to her as Mrs. Jiang, tried to stay calm at first, assuming work had delayed him. But the next day brought only silence as well. As time crept on, the family grew alarmed. Mr. Wang never disappeared without a word. On the 3rd day of his absence, an unmistakable dread settled over their apartment. Wang Jing and her mother phoned friends, relatives, anyone who might have seen or heard from him. He had left home with no hint of danger, but now he was simply gone. Late on April 14th, just as concern about Mr. Wang reached fever pitch, another shock hit the household. Wang Jing received a cryptic text message from an unknown number. The sender claimed to be holding her father hostage, and, bizarrely, also holding Jiang Lin's sister captive. The message demanded that ransom money be prepared for delivery to Jiangjiakou, a city in neighbouring Hebei province. If true, it meant Mr. Wang was alive, but in grave peril. Yet this ransom note didn't name a price, which immediately struck the family as odd. Kidnappers typically specify an amount. Here, they only insisted on readiness to pay and warned against contacting law enforcement. Panicked, Wang Jing and her mother spent the night debating how to respond. They also informed Jiang of the threat to his sister. He rushed over to console Wang Jing, insisting they'd find a way to save both hostages. The message raised countless questions. Why Hebei? Why the fiancé's sister too? And did this truly explain Mr. Wang's disappearance, or was something even more sinister at play? Exhausted and terrified, the 2 women clung to hope that by following the instructions, they could reunite their family. Determined to protect her husband, Mrs. Jiang tried to gather what funds she could, while Wang Jing stayed by her phone, desperate for further instructions that never came. Silence from the kidnappers only fueled their dread. But the nightmare was just beginning. On the morning of April 15th, fate delivered an even darker twist. Around 10:50 a.m., Wang Jing called the Shilinhot Public Security Bureau in a state of distress. She had just discovered her mother's body in the family apartment. Blood stained the floor, evidence of a violent struggle. Police arrived to find a chaotic scene. A woman murdered in her own home. Her husband missing under inexplicable circumstances. Mrs. Jiang's reputation around town was of a kind shop owner who sold handmade crafts, always greeting customers with a warm laugh. No one could fathom why she would be targeted. Investigators set to work, cordoning off the area and examining every trace of evidence. As word spread among neighbours, confusion only deepened. A few nights ago, all anyone had worried about was the missing Mr. Wang. Now his wife was dead, and the kidnapping message lingered unanswered on Wang Jing's phone. How did it all connect? Officers carefully interviewed a devastated Wang Jing, learning how she'd last spoken to her mother the previous night to discuss lunch plans. The police wasted no time scrutinizing the ransom text. Wang Jing explained it had arrived just hours before her mother's murder. The message was found to be linked to a man named Shui Ping, a person she didn't recognize. Investigators were baffled. Was this abduction story genuine, or had someone used it to mislead the family while planning something even deadlier? Struggling through grief, Wang Jing repeated the kidnappers' bizarre claims. Not only had they seized her father, but they were also holding her fiancé's sister. Yet no one had asked for a specific ransom or followed up with further demands. If the text was meant to scare them into silence, it had succeeded. Now, with her mother gone, the entire situation felt staged. The question was, staged by whom? The possibility emerged that someone had orchestrated the kidnapping narrative to deter the family from going to the police too soon. If so, this pointed to a calculated murder plot rather than a sudden act of rage. But what motive could drive anyone to such extremes, especially against people with no known enemies? Detectives divided their efforts between two urgent tasks. First, find Mr. Wong. If he was truly alive, time was critical. Second, learn more about this unknown sender, Shui Ping. Officers spoke with Wang Jing at length, reviewing her phone records and any details about how she discovered the text. One look at her tear-streaked face made it clear she was as much in the dark as they were. With the funeral of one family member looming and another potentially in grave danger, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Police saw a swirling vortex of clues: disappearance, murder, and an inexplicable ransom message, and realized they were dealing with a deeply tangled crime. As events would soon confirm, the truth was darker than anyone imagined. As investigators continued to process the scene and gather statements, yet another shocking report came in. Almost simultaneously, police learned of 2 more bodies found in town under disturbing circumstances. Earlier that same day, April 15th, 2 hotel staff members at separate small hotels in Shilinhot had made grisly discoveries. Each found a guest dead in their rented room, apparently murdered. One victim was a man, the other a woman. The local police quickly linked these discoveries to the ongoing investigation when the identities came through. These victims were relatives of Wang Jing as well. It turned out that Wang Jing's older cousin, 30-something Ms. Wang, Wang Muwei, and the cousin's husband, Mr. Qian Mugo, had been killed in 2 different inns in the city. Ms. Wang and Mr. Qian ran a successful small business together, a restaurant known for its delicious dumplings. They were a popular couple in the community, known for their hard work and cheerful personalities. They had each been staying in Shilinhot, possibly to support Wang Jing's family during the crisis of Mr. Wang's disappearance. Now both of them were dead, murdered in cold blood, in 2 separate locations. When news of the cousin and her husband's deaths reached the investigative team, it was almost overwhelming. In the span of 1 week, 4 members of Wang Jing's family were either dead or missing. Her father missing, her mother murdered, her cousin murdered, and cousin-in-law murdered. A horrifying pattern was emerging, suggesting a coordinated attack on this family. What on earth had this family done to warrant such targeted brutality? And could Mr. Wong still be alive? Or was he perhaps another victim yet to be found? The police officially classified this as a major criminal case, given the multiple homicides. They codenamed it the 415 case, after the date of the first murder report. The city authorities and even regional authorities took notice immediately. This was an exceptionally serious case. The Inner Mongolia Public Security Department, the Regional Police Bureau, Shilingol League Public Security, and even the Beijing Public Security Bureau offered support to Shilinhot investigators. A special task force was formed within hours to handle the case, pooling the best investigators and resources. Solving these murders became priority number 1. The pressure on the task force was immense. This wasn't just a local crime, it was a case that could shake public confidence in law enforcement if not solved quickly. As the sun climbed higher on April 15th, detectives fanned out to multiple crime scenes. There was Mrs. Zhang's home, where forensic teams were combing for any physical evidence the killer might have left. And now there were the 2 hotel rooms where the cousin, Ms. Wang, and her husband, Mr. Qian, were found. Each scene was secured and analysed in parallel, a massive undertaking for the local police. At Mrs. Jiang's apartment, the forensic examiners quickly confirmed what was obvious. She had been attacked and killed by an assailant. Reports later noted that she likely died from manual strangulation, given bruising on her neck, along with signs of blunt force trauma. A cruel end for an innocent woman. These specific details weren't officially released, but cruelly killed was the term used. The forensic team meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail, collecting samples of blood, hair, and fibers. They dusted for fingerprints, hoping to find a trace of the killer. There were no signs of forced entry at the apartment door, suggesting that Mrs. Jiang may have known her attacker or had let them in willingly. Perhaps the killer had posed as someone delivering news about her husband, lowering her guard. We can only imagine the fear and confusion she must have felt in her final moments. Inside her mind, a desperate plea. Why? What have I done? Meanwhile, at the first inn across town, investigators examined the room where Wang Jing's cousin's body was found. The victim, Ms. Wang Muwei, was discovered lying on the floor of the small hotel room. The room showed signs of violence, furniture upset, perhaps a struggle. The bed was unmade, a lamp was overturned, and there were signs of a brief but violent confrontation. Similarly, at the second inn, the cousin's husband, Mr. Qian, had been slain. Both appeared to have been killed in a similar manner, possibly also by strangulation or a quick, silent method. There were no witnesses who saw or heard the attacks. These were modest inns with maybe a handful of guests. No one noticed anything until it was too late. However, police did gather CCTV footage from the hotel lobbies and corridors. The grainy security videos would later prove crucial. On them, a figure resembling a man in his late 20s could be seen entering or exiting around the time of the murders, someone who did not work at the hotel. The same man appeared on footage at both hotels that day, and he carried himself in a furtive way, wearing a baseball cap low over his face. The investigators watched the footage repeatedly, scrutinizing every detail of the suspect's appearance, his build, his gait, the way he held his head. They needed any clue that could help them identify him. Investigators now had an unidentified suspect on camera. Back at headquarters, detectives began piecing together timelines. They established that Mr. Wang, the missing father, had last been seen on April 9th when he went to meet someone for a business-related discussion. This meeting, as far as the family knew, was with a contact arranged by Jiang Lin, a supposed connection to lucrative government contracts. After that, he seemingly vanished. Mrs. Jiang was killed on the morning of April 15th. The emergency call came at 10:54 a.m., but she may have been attacked earlier that morning. The cousin and her husband were likely killed either late on April 14th or early April 15th, given when their bodies were found. This indicated a coordinated spree, multiple murders carried out in a tight window of time. The detectives spread out a large map of Shilinhot on a table, marking the locations of the crime scenes and Mr. Wang's last known whereabouts. They used colored pins and string to connect the dots, trying to visualize the killer's movements and establish a pattern. One urgent task for police was to find Mr. Wang, the missing father. Given the carnage already discovered, they feared he might become victim number 4 if he wasn't already. The kidnapping message hinted he was alive as of the previous night. Could that message have been a ploy to lure the family into not calling police while the killer finished his deadly work? It certainly seemed possible. Investigators also started digging into the mysterious name in the ransom text, Shui Ping. Who was he, and could he be connected to the family or the victims? A quick database search and interviews revealed that Shui Ping was a 33-year-old man originally from Chifeng, another city in Inner Mongolia, who had worked in Shilinhot in the past. Shui Ping had a fairly unremarkable background. He had held various blue-collar jobs, nothing that suggested a propensity for violence. He had no prior criminal record. In an interesting coincidence, Shui Ping had once been co-workers with none other than Jiang Lin, Wang Jing's fiancée. This raised eyebrows. If Shui knew Jiang Lin, why would he be sending kidnapping messages involving Jiang's sister? The whole scenario grew more convoluted. With multiple leads to chase, the special task force split into several teams. One team continued to process forensic evidence, like potential fingerprints or DNA, from the scenes. Another team was assigned to track down Shui Ping, treating him now as a person of interest, possibly the same man spotted in the CCTV footage. Yet another set of officers began re-interviewing family and friends, trying to map out any motive that would explain why someone targeted Wang Jing's family so ruthlessly. They interviewed neighbors, colleagues, and distant relatives, searching for any hint of feuds, debts, or rivalries that could explain the violence. But everyone they spoke to described the Wang family as ordinary, well-liked people. At the center of this storm, young Wang Jing was reeling with grief and fear. But she was not alone. Jiang Lin, her fiancé, was by her side through it all. In fact, Jiang Lin had been physically present with Wang Jing when she discovered her mother's body and when she spoke to police. He appeared to be the supportive future son-in-law, devastated by what was happening to Wang Jing's family, especially since, according to the kidnapping claim, his family was threatened too. Remember, the text said his sister was kidnapped. From the outside, Jiang Lin cut a sympathetic figure, 27 years old, well-educated and polite, with a steady job. He worked as a mid-level manager at a local company, and his colleagues described him as intelligent and ambitious, if a bit reserved. He had met Wang Jing a couple of years prior, and they fell in love. Her parents were fond of him, and had given their blessing to the marriage. By all accounts, Jiang Lin was about to become part of the family he now helped comfort. Yet as investigators quietly observed those around Wang Jing, something about Jiang Lin's behavior bothered them. One of the senior detectives, a veteran named Li Wei, had a hunch that he couldn't shake. Li Wei had spent over 20 years on the force, and he had developed a keen sense for deception. He could read people like a book, picking up on subtle cues that others might miss. Jiang Lin was cooperative, almost too cooperative. He answered questions that were directed at Wang Jing, interjected details that a fiancé wouldn't necessarily know, and seemed oddly eager to steer the investigation's narrative. And when officers asked him directly about the kidnapping message and his kidnapped sister, Jiang Lin's eyes flickered, a brief flash of what looked like nervousness. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but Li Wei caught it. It was the kind of telltale sign that often betrayed a guilty conscience. Later, one investigator would remark that Jiang Lin's reactions just didn't match those of an innocent man in such circumstances. He was unnaturally composed and chatty at the crime scene, which immediately raised red flags for us, one officer noted. Another detective recalled how Jiang avoided making eye contact whenever the topic of Shui Ping came up, as if he recognized the name but tried to hide it. He would subtly shift his body language, fidgeting slightly or looking away when Shui Ping's name was mentioned. These were classic signs of someone trying to conceal something. These instinctual observations, honed from years on the job, made the detectives suspicious. Could it be that the danger to this family was not coming from outside strangers alone, but perhaps from someone inside their circle? The possibility was unsettling. What if the killer had been hiding in plain sight among the concerned relatives? Police had to tread carefully. Accusing the grieving fiancé with no hard evidence would be a serious step. But they decided it was necessary to look closer at Jiang Lin. Quietly, they ran a background check on him and began verifying his whereabouts during the critical times. Jiang Lin claimed he was with Wang Jing the entire morning of April 15th, which was true during the discovery of the mother's body. But what about the night of April 14th, or early that morning, when the murders likely occurred? He said he had been at home asleep. Detectives would need to corroborate that. They started discreetly checking his alibi, interviewing neighbors, and reviewing security footage from his apartment building. As day turned to evening on April 15th, the police brought Jiang Lin into the station for a more formal interview, or interrogation. They framed it as routine, wanting to get a full statement from him since he was among the first on the scene of Mrs. Jiang's death, and was intimately involved in the family drama. Jiang Lin complied, appearing calm. He likely thought he had played his part as the helpful relative well, confident that he had covered his tracks. However, under sharper questioning, Jiang Lin's composure began to crack. investigators started asking about the inconsistencies and oddities. Why would kidnappers abduct your sister, along with Wang Jing's father? Jiang stammered that he didn't know. Maybe it was because his family was wealthy, which it wasn't particularly. He tried to sound confused and worried, but his explanation felt weak and unconvincing. Why didn't the ransom demand specify an amount of money? He mumbled something about maybe they wanted to negotiate in person. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his nervousness. Had he been in contact with Shui Ping recently, given they used to be co-workers? At this, Jiang Lin broke eye contact and said no, he hadn't spoken to Shui in a long time. This was the crucial moment. Li Wei, watching intently, saw the flicker of fear in Jiang Lin's eyes. He knew they were onto something. The mention of Shui Ping was deliberate. The police hadn't publicized that the ransom text came from Shui. Only a few people knew that detail. Jiang's reaction to Shui's name was telling, a flicker of recognition he tried to suppress. The room grew tense. Investigators pressed harder, and at some point confronted Jiang Lin. "We know you're not telling us everything. We believe you're involved in this somehow. It's time to come clean," they said. Faced with mounting pressure, Jiang Lin suddenly buckled. Perhaps he realized the evidence and questioning were closing in on him, or perhaps he simply couldn't withstand the psychological strain. His carefully constructed facade crumbled. He slumped in his chair, his face pale, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Late on April 15th, Jiang Lin confessed, at least in part. In a shaky voice, he admitted to the interrogators that he had not been truthful. He knew exactly what happened to Wang Jing's family. In fact, he said, he had planned it. This was a bombshell admission. According to later reports, Jiang Lin finally confessed to conspiring with Shui Ping to carry out the murders. That's right, the seemingly distraught fiancé revealed that he had a partner in crime, Shui Ping, the same man whose name was on the ransom text. In one breath, Jiang Lin went from helpful witness to self-confessed conspirator in a quadruple murder. Detectives, though not entirely shocked, their instincts had led them here, now had to act fast on this new information. Jiang Lin was immediately detained as a homicide suspect. And the hunt for Shui Ping became even more urgent, because if what Jiang said was true, Shui was the one out there who had done the killing itself. Shui Ping was now a fugitive murder suspect, armed and dangerous. The news of Jiang Lin's confession spread quickly through the task force. A sense of grim satisfaction mixed with urgency filled the room. They had cracked the case, but the job wasn't done yet. They needed to catch Shui Ping before he could harm anyone else. Under interrogation, Jiang Lin spilled enough details to galvanize the next steps of the investigation. He confirmed that Shui Ping was the one who physically carried out the murders. Shui had allegedly attacked Wang Jing's father, mother, cousin, and cousin's husband, one by one, over the past week, all at Jiang Lin's behest. Jiang admitted his role was to plan and incite, while Shui was the one who got his hands dirty. He described Shui as a tool, a weapon that he had wielded to achieve his goals. He showed no empathy for Shui, only a cold detachment. One crucial detail Jiang Lin provided was the whereabouts of Mr. Wang, the missing father. When pressed about Mr. Wang's fate, Jiang revealed that Shui Ping had already killed him days earlier. The body, Jiang indicated, was hidden in a rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. This was information only the perpetrators could have known, and it horrified the officers taking the statement. Mr. Wang was no hostage after all. He had been the first to die. The scale of Jiang Lin's depravity was becoming clear. He had not only orchestrated the murders, but had also allowed the family to suffer the agonizing uncertainty of Mr. Wang's disappearance. Immediately, a police team was dispatched to the address Jiang Lin gave, a small rental flat that Shui had allegedly used. The apartment was located in a nondescript building in a quiet residential area. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, where a stranger could easily blend in. There they found the body of Mr. Wang, the fourth victim, just as Jiang described. It was now confirmed 4 murders had been committed in this case. Wang Jing's father, mother, cousin, and cousin-in-law were all dead, cruelly and methodically eliminated. The scene at the apartment was grim. Mr. Wong's body had been there for several days, and the signs of violence were unmistakable. The forensic team worked quickly but meticulously, gathering evidence that would further link Shui Ping to the crime. With Jiang Lin in custody, he likely divulged additional information about Shui Ping's movements. Jiang may have known that Shui was staying in local hotels during the spree, since he had helped arrange or suggest those locations. Armed with this, investigators double-checked Shui Ping's lodging records in Shilinhot. Sure enough, Shui had checked into 2 different inns in recent days, the same 2 where the cousin and her husband were found. That tied Shui firmly to those crime scenes. The hotel records showed the dates of Shui Ping's check-in and check-out, matching the timeline of the murders. They also provided a physical description of Shui, which matched the figure seen on the CCTV footage. This confirmation allowed the police to piece together the chronology of the murders more clearly. April 9th, Shui Ping lures Mr. Wong out under false pretenses and murders him, hiding his body in a rental apartment. Mr. Wong becomes the first victim, although at the time it was just a missing person case. April 14th, Shui Ping, likely on instructions, targets Wong Jing's cousin and her husband. The cousin, Ms. Wong, was staying at Inn A, her husband, Mr. Qian, at Inn B. It's possible Shui tricked them individually, perhaps contacting them under a guise, and murdered each in their rooms. They become victims 2 and 3. April 15th. Shui Ping visits Mrs. Jiang at her home, perhaps under the pretense of delivering news or assistance regarding the kidnapping. Once inside, he overpowers and murders her, making Mrs. Jiang the 4th victim. Shui then flees the scene. Around 10:50 a.m., Wong Jing discovers her mother and calls police. The murder spree concludes, but the investigation begins. Now, with all 4 victims accounted for, the case had evolved into a full-blown serial murder investigation with a suspected mastermind in custody and a killer on the run. The city of Shilinhot was on edge, but news that the police had a suspect, Yang, in hand, provided some reassurance that the case was cracking open. Still, Shui Ping was at large, and he had proven willing to kill without hesitation. It was time for an intensive manhunt. The 415 task force kicked into high gear. They immediately issued an all-points bulletin and a warrant for Shui Ping's arrest on charges of intentional homicide. Given that Shui was from Qifeng, about 800 kilometers away, he might try to escape back there or elsewhere. The task force didn't wait. They alerted law enforcement across Inner Mongolia and neighboring provinces. Shui's description, photograph, and identifying details were circulated widely. Checkpoints were notified, train and bus stations alerted. It was a race against time. The bulletin described Shui Ping as armed and dangerous, urging caution to anyone who might encounter him. One break in tracking Shui's escape was the use of modern investigative technology. Police leveraged digital surveillance and mobile tracking to zero in on Shui's path. It's likely they tracked his cell phone signal or saw his face on highway surveillance cameras as he fled Shilinhot. They used sophisticated tracking software, analyzing cell tower data and cross-referencing it with traffic camera footage. The task force split into 7 pursuit teams, dispatched to different regions, including Beijing, Hebei, Liaoning, and Jilin, following any leads on Shui's potential route. This was an all-hands effort. Hundreds of officers were now focused on bringing Shui Ping in. Each team was equipped with the latest technology and communication equipment, ready to act swiftly on any new information. The pressure on Shui was immense. By now, he surely knew that Jiang Lin had been caught and that the police were after him. Perhaps he thought he could slip away before they closed the net. But the net was tightening quickly. Shui Ping, alone and on the run, must have felt the walls closing in. He knew his time was limited. By the pre-dawn hours of April 16th, less than a day since the first murder was discovered, police had tracked Shui Ping to the city of Tongliao, a city in eastern Inner Mongolia. Tongliao is several hundred kilometers from Shilinhot. Shui had covered a lot of ground in a short time. It's believed he was attempting to keep moving to avoid capture, possibly aiming to reach a major transit hub or hide with acquaintances. But unbeknownst to him, Law enforcement in Tongliao had been alerted and were lying in wait. In the darkness near a highway toll station on the outskirts of Tongliao, officers set up surveillance. They chose this location strategically, based on their analysis of Shui Ping's likely escape route. It was a choke point, a place he would have to pass through to continue his journey. They had reason to believe Shui would pass through that checkpoint, and they were right. In the early hours of April 16th, a vehicle approached the toll booth matching the description tied to Shui. The officers held their breath, their eyes fixed on the approaching car. This was the moment they had been waiting for. When the car halted to pay the toll, police units surged forward. In a swift, coordinated move, they boxed in the car and ordered the suspect out at gunpoint. Shui Ping was taken completely by surprise. He had no time to resist or flee. The officers moved with precision and speed, trained for this exact scenario. They surrounded the car, weapons drawn, shouting commands. In that instant, the deadly game he had been playing was over. At approximately 1 a.m. on April 16th, Shui Ping was arrested at the Tongliao toll station. The arrest was the result of remarkable police work, a multi-region pursuit that lasted only around 14 to 16 hours from the first report of the crime. Later that day, at a press briefing, the Shilinhot Public Security Bureau announced the successful capture of both suspects, emphasizing how rapidly the case was solved with interagency support. The community breathed a sigh of relief, knowing the killers were no longer free. The press briefing was broadcast on local and national news, reassuring the public that the perpetrators had been apprehended and that justice would be served. When officers searched Shui Ping at the time of arrest, they found evidence linking him to the crimes. On him were a few items belonging to the victims, including Mr. Wong's wallet and a piece of jewelry that had belonged to Mrs. Jiang. These gruesome trophies, or perhaps just stolen items, further cemented that they had their man. Additionally, bloodstains on Shui's clothing would later match the victims through forensic analysis, proving his presence at the crime scenes. The discovery of the victims' belongings was a crucial piece of physical evidence, directly linking Shui Ping to the murders. Shui Ping was swiftly brought back to Shilinhot under heavy guard. He was about to face an intense interrogation, and the weight of 4 murders hung over him. Initially, Shui was defiant. According to later reports, when he was first questioned, he stuck to a story that he believed justified what he had done. This was not a typical case of a killer denying involvement. Shui admitted to the killings, but he claimed he had a reason that in his mind made him not a villain, but a sort of avenger. He clung to the fabricated narrative, desperate to believe that he had acted righteously. Investigators prepared to hear Shui's side of the story, knowing full well that Jiang Lin had already implicated him. What Shui would reveal, however, was a twisted tale of love, lies, and revenge that no one could have predicted. Sitting in the stark interrogation room, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Shui Ping finally began to talk. The room was small and bare, designed to create a sense of isolation and pressure. A single table and a few chairs were the only furnishings. A video camera mounted in the corner silently recorded everything. Perhaps he felt cornered with all the evidence against him, or maybe in some warped way he wanted to explain himself. What came out of Shui's mouth was astonishing. Shui calmly stated that he killed those 4 people to avenge his girlfriend, a woman named Jiang Yukai. The investigators exchanged puzzled glances. Girlfriend? The name Jiang Yukai had not appeared in any part of the investigation until now. Who was she, and what did she have to do with the Wong family? Detective Li Wei, who was leading the interrogation, leaned forward, his expression unreadable. He had heard many strange stories in his career, but this one was already shaping up to be extraordinary. Shui then spun an elaborate story, which he clearly believed wholeheartedly. He claimed that Jiang Yukai was a Chinese woman of about 30 years old, who had grown up in the United States, a Chinese American. She was, according to him, from a once wealthy family, a family of means, as he put it. However, her fortunes had taken a dramatic downturn. Her father had been arrested and imprisoned in China, which led to the collapse of her family's business. Not long after, Jiang Yukai's mother passed away. But before she died, she left behind a huge inheritance for her daughter. Shui Ping spoke with a mixture of pride and sorrow, as if recounting a tragic romance. He described Jiang Yukai as beautiful, intelligent, and kind, the perfect woman. At this point in Shui's recounting, the detectives were trying to see the relevance. It sounded like he was describing a soap opera or the backstory of his mysterious girlfriend. Shui's demeanor was serious, even emotional, as he continued. According to Shui, this large inheritance became the target of greedy villains. And who were those villains? Wang Jing's family, he said. Specifically, Shui insisted that Wang Jing's parents and relatives, the very people he killed, had taken advantage of Jiang Yukai's vulnerable situation to seize control of her inheritance. He claimed that Wang Jing's family coveted and controlled Jiang Yukai's wealth, leaving Jiang Yukai with nothing. Not only that, Shui said that these people, the Wangs and their kin, were keeping Jiang Yukai captive, restricting her freedom so she could not speak out or reclaim what was hers. He painted a picture of a helpless woman trapped by ruthless relatives, a damsel in distress desperately needing his help. Detectives asked Shui how he came to know Jiang Yukai. He explained that they had met online a few years ago and developed a romantic relationship. He described their first encounter on WeChat, a casual exchange of messages that blossomed into a deep connection. He said they shared their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Jiang Yukai, he said, had confided in him about her hardships, how her once loving family life fell apart after her father's legal troubles, how she was left at the mercy of distant relatives, the Wangs, who sought her mother's money. Shui described Jiang Yukai as his devoted girlfriend, despite the physical distance. They chatted every day, exchanged affection, and built dreams of a life together once he could rescue her from her tormentors. He spoke of their plans to marry, to have children, to build a life together free from the shadow of her past. As he continued, he was reliving the pain and anger he had felt, the righteous fury that had driven him to kill. To the investigators, it was clear. Shui Ping truly believed this story. He had killed 4 people, including an elderly couple, under the conviction that they were evil people who had wronged Jiang Yukai. He showed no remorse for the murders. In his mind, they deserved to die for what they had done. "I did it to take revenge for my girlfriend, Jiang Yukai," Shui stated emphatically. He portrayed himself as almost a tragic hero, avenging the suffering of the woman he adored. To the experienced officers, Shui's story sounded like a fantastical delusion. There were immediate red flags: wealthy Chinese-American heiress, a family in Inner Mongolia illegally holding her captive to steal her inheritance. It sounded improbable, to say the least. Moreover, Wang Jing's family, the victims, had no known links to such a person or to any big inheritance case. They were a normal, well-off local family, not some criminal enterprise. The investigators didn't buy Shui's tale for a second, but they saw the sincerity in his eyes. If Shui was telling the truth about his beliefs, it meant someone had likely fed him this fiction. He himself might have been manipulated. They suspected that this might be where Jiang Lin's role came into full light. Detective Li Wei realized that they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple revenge killing. They were dealing with a carefully constructed web of lies designed to manipulate and control. One detective asked pointedly, "Shui Ping, who told you about Jiang Yukai's situation? How did you first learn of her story?" Perhaps he wanted to hear Shui say it. Shui explained that he met her online through social media, WeChat specifically, and they had been in a long-distance relationship entirely through texts, voice messages, and occasional phone calls. He had never met Jiang Yukai in person. She often couldn't video chat, giving excuses about strict supervision by family, so their contact was mostly text. He said that Jiang Yukai had sent him photos, images of a beautiful young woman with a sad smile. He treasured those photos, keeping them on his phone as a reminder of the woman he was fighting for. Even more telling, Shui mentioned another name during his confession, Jiang Lin. He claimed that Jiang Lin was actually the fiancée of this Jiang Yukai, a fiancée she did not love, and that was why he, Shui, initially reached out to Wang Jing's family. If your head is spinning, you're not alone. The detectives were now untangling a knot of lies within lies. In Shui's telling, Jiang Lin was an antagonist as well, supposedly engaged to Yang Yukai against her will, perhaps aiding his family in keeping her trapped. This, of course, directly contradicted reality. Jiang Lin was engaged to Wang Jing, not some American heiress. The story was convoluted, but Shui's belief in it was unwavering. To put it plainly, Shui Ping had been living in an entirely fictitious world constructed by someone else. The people he killed, Wang Jing's father, mother, cousin, and cousin-in-law, were real people who had done nothing to Jiang Yukai, whoever she was. But Shui was convinced they were villains. The investigators needed to break through his narrative with cold facts. The interrogation team knew they had to confront Shui Ping with reality. One officer slid a folder across the table containing what they had already discovered about this alleged Jiang Yukai. The folder was thin, because no records of a person named Jiang Yukai matched the description Shui gave. They had checked databases. No Chinese American of that name, no local resident either. Nothing to indicate she was real. The folder contained printouts of database searches, immigration records, and social media profiles. All blank. There was no trace of Jiang Yukai anywhere. Perhaps the lead investigator leaned forward and spoke gently but firmly. "Shui Ping, we've done some checking. We can't find any evidence that Jiang Yukai exists." But Shui insisted that he had spoken to her, that he knew her voice, her hopes, her fears. He had fallen in love with her, and he couldn't accept that she was a figment of his imagination. He had perhaps even seen a few photos of a beautiful woman that she sent. But then the officer continued, laying out the evidence. "We have reason to believe that Jiang Yukai is not who you think she is. In fact, it appears she is a completely fabricated identity." This was the moment of truth for Shui. Initially, he might have reacted with anger or denial. He might have shouted, pounded the table, insisted that the police were wrong. He might have accused them of being part of the conspiracy, of protecting the Wong family. But investigators proceeded to show him what they had uncovered from Jiang Lin's confession and the digital forensic analysis. The WeChat account of Jiang Yukai, police tech experts had traced its registration details and online activity. They found that the account was accessed from devices and locations that lined up with Jiang Lin, not an overseas Chinese-American woman. For example, one login might have come from Jiang Lin's home IP address. They showed Shui Ping printouts of the account activity, highlighting the IP addresses and timestamps. The evidence was irrefutable. Another clue, the profile photo of Jiang Yukai, was likely a random picture of an unknown woman, perhaps lifted from the internet. They showed Shui Ping the photo, comparing it to images found on various websites. It was clear that the photo was not unique, that it had been taken from somewhere else. No travel or immigration records for anyone named Jiang Yukai returning from the US to China in that period, as Shui claimed happened. The police had checked with immigration authorities, both in China and the United States. There was no record of anyone matching Jiang Yukai's description entering or leaving the country. The stark coincidence that the surname Jiang was shared by this supposed heiress and by Jiang Lin himself. Perhaps the officer pointed out, "Don't you find it interesting that your girlfriend shares the same surname as Jiang Lin?" This was a simple but powerful point. The odds of such a coincidence were incredibly slim. As this evidence mounted, Shui's face fell. His eyes darted from one piece of evidence to another, his mind struggling to process the information. The world he had believed in was crumbling around him. The realization must have dawned painfully. He had been duped. The woman for whom he believed he was avenging injustice was a phantom. There was no imprisoned heiress, no stolen inheritance. It had all been a lie. Police later summarized this breakthrough with a stark statement. "After in-depth investigation, we discovered an astonishing fact. The person called Jiang Yukai simply did not exist." The supposed girlfriend that Shui spoke of was actually a character concocted by Wang Jing's own fiancée, Jiang Lin. This was the shocking truth at the heart of the case. When Shui Ping finally accepted this, his world collapsed. He slumped in his chair, his body shaking with sobs. The anger and righteousness drained away, replaced by a profound sense of grief and shame. He had killed 4 innocent people for a lie. The betrayal by his girlfriend was, in reality, a betrayal by his former friend Jiang Lin. Shui reportedly broke down in tears when the truth sunk in, alternating between disbelief and despair. All those loving messages, all those urgent pleas for help that drove him to murder. They were Jiang Lin talking to him the whole time. It was a cruel manipulation on an epic scale. He had been a puppet, dancing to the tune of a master manipulator. His love, his loyalty, his sense of justice, all had been exploited. With both suspects talking, Shui in shock, and Jiang facing the evidence of his digital deceit, the narrative became clear. Jiang Lin, the mild-mannered fiancé, was the architect of this entire tragedy. He had staged an incredibly elaborate con over years to ensnare Shui Ping and use him to eliminate Wang Jing's family. The detectives now saw Jiang Lin not as a grieving fiancé, but as a cold, calculating predator, capable of extraordinary cruelty. Several years before the murders, around 2018, Jiang Lin and Shui Ping worked together at a company in Shilinhot. They weren't best friends, but they knew each other enough to chat. Jiang Lin was known as a quiet, somewhat reserved individual, but he was also intelligent and ambitious. He kept to himself mostly, but he was always polite and respectful to his colleagues. Jiang observed Shui's personality. He was an ordinary guy, perhaps a bit naive, possibly lonely. Shui Ping was a simple man, with simple dreams. He wanted a wife, a family, a stable life. He was not particularly ambitious or worldly, but he was kind-hearted and trusting. When Jiang Lin left that job, he kept the contact of his former co-worker Shui. This was not unusual. People often kept in touch with former colleagues, but in Jiang Lin's case, it was the first step in a long and elaborate con. Sometime after, Jiang Lin created a fake WeChat account using a female identity, complete with a profile picture of an attractive woman. He chose the alias Jiang Yukai. He likely spent considerable time crafting this online persona, choosing the right photo, creating a believable backstory, and developing a consistent voice and personality. Posing as this woman, Jiang Lin initiated contact with Shui Ping online, maybe with a friendly, accidental hello message or by commenting on a post of his. Shui responded, and they struck up a conversation. Over days and weeks, casual chat turned into frequent personal conversations. Jiang Yukai flirted with Shui, listened to his problems, and shared stories about her own life. Jiang Lin was effectively catfishing his former colleague, and Shui had no idea. Jiang Lin was a master of deception, playing on Shui Ping's emotions, building trust and intimacy through carefully crafted messages. Through long-term chatting and carefully fabricated stories, Jiang Lin successfully brainwashed Shui Ping, making him deeply believe in this Chinese-American girlfriend. The stories Jiang told as Yukai were detailed and evolving. He made her worldly, gentle, and in need of a protector. He spun tales of her glamorous life in America, her struggles with her family, and her longing for a simpler life in China. Over months, Jiang Lin built an emotional bond with Shui from behind the screen. Shui fell in love with the persona. He would have cherished the idea that this sophisticated, kind woman cared for him. He saw her as his soulmate, the woman he had been waiting for his whole life. Once Jiang Lin had Shui's devotion, he began seeding the narrative of injustice. Jiang Yukai confided in Shui about her wealthy background and the misfortunes that befell her family. She spoke of her father's imprisonment under murky circumstances, of her mother's death, and a large inheritance left behind. Then came the villains of the story. She told Shui that a family, the Wang family in Shilinhot, who were distant relatives or former business associates, the exact lie is unclear, were scheming to take her inheritance. She claimed that this family coerced her, perhaps luring her to Inner Mongolia, and that now they essentially held her prisoner, controlling her every move. She described the Wang family as greedy, ruthless, and manipulative, people who would stop at nothing to get their hands on her money. She might have said she was kept somewhere secret and couldn't escape. But she managed to communicate with Shui in secret. She told Shui that he was her only hope, the only one she could trust. To Shui, this was a call to arms. The woman he loved was trapped and robbed by these monsters. His chats with Zhang Yukai grew more intense, especially over the months leading up to April 2021. Zhang Lin had stoked Shui's anger and sense of righteousness continually, bringing him to a boiling point. He sent Shui messages filled with righteous indignation, painting himself as a victim and Shui as her savior. By early 2021, Shui was fully convinced that Wang Jing's family, though he may not have known them by name, only as targets described by Yukai, deserved to die for what they'd supposedly done. He had become a weapon, primed and ready to strike. But why did Zhang Lin target Wang Jing's family in reality? Here's the crucial part. Zhang Lin was now engaged to Wang Jing, having met her after he'd already begun the Zhang Yukai con. This was the twisted intersection of Zhang Lin's two lives. His real life with Wang Jing and his fabricated life with Shui Ping. When Zhang Lin got to know Wang Jing's family, he discovered something. Her father, Mr. Wang, had money and connections in the construction industry. That's when greed took hold of Zhang. He wanted a piece of that wealth, and he set a plan in motion to get it. Zhang Lin saw an opportunity, a chance to enrich himself at the expense of his future in-laws. Zhang Lin lied to his future father-in-law, Mr. Wang, claiming that his own brother-in-law had a high position in the Transportation Bureau and could help Mr. Wang's company secure lucrative construction projects. This was completely false, a total scam. He invented a fictional brother-in-law, weaving a tale of influence and connections. But Mr. Wang, hoping to expand his business, took the bait. Zhang Lin asked Mr. Wang to pay a large facilitation fee, a bribe, upfront to grease the wheels for these imaginary contracts. Trusting his future son-in-law, Mr. Wang handed over what was described as a huge sum of money to Zhang Lin for this purpose. Mr. Wang, a trusting and ambitious man, saw this as a legitimate business opportunity. He had no idea that he was being swindled by the man his daughter loved. Zhang Lin promptly squandered the money on personal expenses and probably debts. None of it went to any official, since there was no official. He spent the money on lavish dinners, expensive clothes, and luxury items, frittering away his future father-in-law's hard-earned money. For a while, Mr. Wang probably waited for news of the promised project. When nothing materialized, he must have started asking questions. It wouldn't be long before Mr. Wang realized he had been defrauded by the man set to marry his daughter, no less. This put Zhang Lin in a perilous spot. If exposed, he could face criminal charges for fraud and certainly lose his fiancée, his reputation, and more. He was living on borrowed time, and he knew it. The walls were closing in. By early April 2021, Zhang Lin's time was running out. The lies were closing in on him. Perhaps Mr. Wang was demanding his money back or threatening to go to the police about the swindle. Zhang Lin had a lot to lose. This is when his two schemes, the catfishing of Shui and the fraud on the Wangs, converged into a diabolical plan. Zhang decided to use Shui to solve his problem. In other words, he would trick Shui into killing Mr. Wang and anyone else in the family who might know of the fraud, thus erasing his debt and silencing those who could expose him. It was murder by proxy, known in Chinese as to kill using someone else's knife. Zhang Lin's layout was meticulous. Through the Zhang Yukai persona, he continued to inflame Shui's wrath towards the Wang family. He very likely gave Shui specific targets and instructions, masquerading it as insider info from Yukai. For example, Yukai might have told Shui, "The ones behind my suffering are Wang Jing's parents and some of their close relatives. They are the ones controlling me." She possibly named them or described them so Shui could identify them. It's even possible that Zhang provided photos of the targets, since he, as the future son-in-law, had pictures of Wang Jing's family that could have been shared under some pretense. He carefully crafted each message, manipulating Shui's emotions, feeding his anger and his desire for revenge. Zhang Lin planned the timeline. He decided Mr. Wang, the father, should be eliminated first, likely because of the fraud pressure and also to decapitate the family's power. That happened around April 9th. Then, perhaps thinking Mrs. Jiang or others might figure things out or inherit and cause trouble, he targeted more. He included Wang Jing's cousin and her husband as targets, perhaps because Mr. Wang might have confided in that cousin, or because they were part of the broader family circle with knowledge of financial matters. We can surmise that maybe the cousin's family was close to Wang Jing's family. They might have been helping investigate the missing Mr. Wang, or Jiang feared they'd suspect him. By eliminating them, he removed more potential accusers and also made it look like the entire family was under attack by some outside enemy, reinforcing the fake kidnapping, revenge narrative to confuse investigators. Finally, he planned for Mrs. Jiang to be killed last, likely because she was a direct witness to the ransom demand, and also would inherit Mr. Wang's estate, which Jiang wanted Wang Jing to inherit unopposed. Indeed, had Jiang's plan succeeded and not been uncovered, Wang Jing would have been left as sole heir to her parents' assets, possibly with Jiang as the comforting fiancé by her side, a position from which he could benefit financially. This motive aligns with the observation. The suspect's motive was that after defrauding the victims, he became enraged and murdered them, as a local official later stated. Jiang Lin's greed and fear of exposure were the driving forces. He was willing to sacrifice an entire family to protect his own lies and secure his financial future. The fake kidnapping text that was sent to Wang Jing, that was part of Jiang's plan too, a smokescreen. After Mr. Wang was killed and before Mrs. Jiang was killed, Jiang had Shui, posing as the kidnappers, send that ransom message. This would mislead the family into thinking Mr. Wang was still alive and in captivity, hopefully delaying them from contacting police. It also conveniently pulled Jiang Lin in as a fellow victim, claiming his sister was kidnapped, to deflect suspicion from him. The fact that the ransom demand was incomplete, no amount, suggests it wasn't truly about getting money, it was about creating confusion. It worked to an extent. The family didn't call police immediately about Mr. Wang, and Jiang was above suspicion until the murders came to light. The ransom message was a calculated distraction, a way to buy time and throw the investigation off course. Jiang Lin must have felt extremely confident. He had manipulated Shui into doing the unthinkable, and likely assumed that with Shui either on the run or eventually caught, authorities would believe the story Shui believed, that some outsider with a grudge, Shui, attacked the family over a fictitious inheritance dispute. Perhaps Jiang thought Shui might even die in a police shootout or be seen as a lone madman, while he, Jiang, would play the role of grieving fiancé and victim whose sister was supposedly kidnapped. It was a daring and cold-blooded plan, the work of someone with a high IQ for crime, as some media later put it. He believed he had crafted the perfect crime, that he was untouchable. But, as the saying goes in China, heaven's net has wide meshes, but nothing escapes it. Despite Jiang Lin's cunning plans, he made mistakes. He didn't count on seasoned detectives sensing his nervousness. He didn't anticipate how quickly the police would link all the murders and catch Shui, within hours, not weeks. And perhaps he underestimated Shui's ability to recount the fantastic story, which rather than fooling police, actually led them to uncover the truth. Jiang Lin's arrogance was his downfall. He overestimated his own intelligence and underestimated the determination of the police. Now, sitting in custody, Jiang Lin had no choice but to admit his deeds. The evidence was overwhelming. From digital records of the fake persona, to financial records of the fraud, to Jiang's own confession already given under pressure. He laid out the entire plot in chilling detail during subsequent interrogations. One can imagine the mix of emotions in the interrogation room. Disgust from investigators at Jiang's callousness, and perhaps a twisted pride from Jiang as he described how he puppeteered Shui. It was indeed like a puppet show. In fact, a Chinese podcast later aptly titled their episode on this case, Puppet Play, highlighting how Jiang treated Shui as a marionette to do his bidding. With the full picture now clear, the focus shifted to building an airtight case against both Jiang Lin and Shui Ping. Investigators compiled a mountain of evidence using a wide array of techniques. The forensic team had gathered fingerprints, footprints, and DNA from the scenes. Shui Ping's fingerprints were found on items at the victims' locations. For instance, a water glass in the Wong home had his prints, as did the door handle at one hotel room. The glass was carefully dusted for prints, revealing a clear set belonging to Shui Ping. This placed him directly at the scene of Mrs. Jiang's murder. Blood evidence and hair samples from the hotels matched Shui as well. Minute traces of blood, invisible to the naked eye, were found on Shui Ping's clothing and shoes. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to the victims. Autopsies confirmed all 4 victims died by homicidal violence, strangulation, and/or blunt force trauma. The autopsies revealed the precise cause of death for each victim, providing further evidence of the brutality of the crimes. This scientific evidence corroborated Shui's presence and actions at each murder scene. Investigators pulled hours of CCTV footage from around the city, not just the hotels, but street cameras and highway toll cameras. They traced Shui's movements on key dates. Footage showed Shui's car, a silver sedan he owned, near the vicinity of Mr. Wong's meeting point on April 9th. The footage showed a car matching Shui Ping's vehicle, driving slowly past Mr. Wong's known meeting location, as if casing the area. Cameras captured Shui entering and leaving the 2 inns where the cousin and husband were killed. The footage showed Shui Ping entering the hotels with his head down, trying to avoid being clearly seen. But his distinctive gait and clothing were still identifiable. Perhaps most damning, a traffic camera recorded Shui's vehicle heading toward the Wong family's neighborhood on the morning of April 15th, and then speeding away shortly before Wong Jing discovered her mother's body. The timestamp on the footage corresponded precisely with the estimated time of Mrs. Jiang's murder. Later, footage from highway cameras showed Shui's car heading east out of Shilinhot after the crimes. This trail of video evidence created a timeline of Shui's journey, aligning perfectly with the times and locations of the murders. The task force's tech specialists dove into phones and computers. They extracted chat histories from Shui Ping's phone, which contained the extensive WeChat conversations with Jiang Yukai. Those logs were pure gold for evidence. They showed Jiang Yukai, really Jiang Lin, explicitly urging Shui to take action against specific people. Investigators found messages like, "They hurt me, they need to pay, and next, you must deal with the woman at home," which corresponded to Mrs. Jiang's murder. The messages were chilling in their directness, leaving no doubt about Jiang Lin's intent. He used language designed to inflame Shui Ping's anger and incite him to violence. These were effectively written instructions to kill, straight from the mastermind to the hitman. Additionally, the ransom message sent to Wong Jing was found in Shui's phone outbox, proving he sent it under orders. On the other side, a forensic analysis of Jiang Lin's devices uncovered the fake Jiang Yukai account. Even if Jiang had tried to delete evidence, tech experts recovered data showing that Jiang's phone had logged into that account. They recovered deleted messages, photos, and even drafts of messages that Jiang Lin had written but never sent. This digital trail was undeniable proof of his deception. They also found draft messages and notes where Jiang plotted out the fictional backstory, almost like a script, to tell Shui. It was a digital paper trail linking Jiang to the Catfish scheme. Investigators traced the money that Mr. Wong gave to Jiang Lin for the fake project. Bank records showed a large transfer from Mr. Wong's account to an account controlled by Jiang Lin earlier in 2021. Afterwards, Jiang's accounts showed rapid withdrawals and expenditures, indicating he spent the money quickly. The bank records showed a clear pattern of suspicious activity, with large sums of money being transferred and then quickly dissipated. This supported the fraud charge, on top of the murders, and established motive. Jiang killed to cover up his fraud. There were also likely communications between Mr. Wong and Jiang about the project that stopped abruptly around the time Mr. Wong disappeared, reinforcing that confrontation was imminent. While there were no direct eyewitnesses to the murders themselves, police gathered statements from people who had interacted with Shui Ping or Jiang Lin around the time of the crimes. Hotel staff confirmed Shui Ping's presence at the inns. Neighbors of the Wong family reported seeing a man matching Shui Ping's description near their apartment building on the morning of Mrs. Jiang's murder. These statements, while circumstantial, helped to corroborate the other evidence. The recorded confessions of both Jiang Lin and Shui Ping became pivotal evidence. Jiang Lin's confession detailed how he orchestrated the murders via deception. Shui Ping's statements, while initially presenting the false motive, eventually aligned with reality once he knew the truth. Shui expressed profound remorse and shock, effectively testifying to how Jiang manipulated him. In Chinese courts, co-conspirator testimony and confessions carry significant weight, especially when backed by corroborating evidence. The interrogations were conducted meticulously, with every word and gesture recorded. The detectives used a combination of pressure, empathy, and psychological tactics to elicit the truth from both suspects. All these investigative techniques were executed with remarkable speed and professionalism. As the Shilinhot Public Security Bureau later noted, through crime scene investigation, video surveillance analysis, and suspect interrogations, police gradually uncovered the truth of the case and identified the real mastermind, Jiang Lin. The coordination between departments, including the cross-province police cooperation to catch Shui, was lauded. The Special Task Force had worked around the clock, splitting into 7 groups to chase leads, and ultimately chase the killer for thousands of miles until they got their man. By May 2021, the case was fully solved and the evidence compiled. The prosecutors formally charged Jiang Lin and Shui Ping with multiple counts of intentional homicide, premeditated murder, and in Jiang's case, additional charges of fraud. The indictment painted Jiang as the primary offender, the mastermind, and Shui as the direct perpetrator under malicious influence. The news of the arrests, and especially the revelation of Jiang Lin's role, sent shockwaves through the Shilinhot community. People who had known Jiang Lin as Wang Jing's polite and seemingly devoted fiancé were stunned. "I just couldn't believe it," said one neighbor, a woman who lived in the same building as Wang Jing and her mother. "He always seemed so nice, so caring. It's hard to imagine someone like that could be capable of such evil." A local shopkeeper who often saw Jiang Lin and Wang Jing together commented, "They looked like such a happy couple. He always held the door for her, carried her groceries. It's like something out of a horror movie, to think that he was planning all this behind her back." Even Jiang Lin's former colleagues were shocked. "He was a bit quiet but always professional," said one. "He was a good worker, always met his deadlines. I never would have suspected him of anything like this." The local media coverage was intense, with newspapers and television stations running detailed reports on the case. The story quickly spread beyond Shilinhot, becoming national news in China. People were captivated and horrified by the intricate plot and the cold-blooded nature of the crimes. The case became a topic of widespread discussion, both online and offline. The revelations of this case sent shockwaves through the local community and across China as the news spread. Media reports highlighted the astonishing cunning of the plot and the tragic outcome. Many outlets referred to it as a high-intelligence crime, a term often used in China for crimes involving elaborate planning or deception. People were fascinated and horrified by how Jiang Lin, a seemingly ordinary young man, could concoct such a diabolical plan to wipe out his fiancée's family. And equally, they were stunned by how completely he was able to brainwash Shui Ping into carrying it out. Online forums and social media platforms were filled with discussions about the case, with people expressing their disbelief, anger, and sympathy for Wang Jing. In the months following the arrests, as the case moved toward trial, more details became public through court hearings. Jiang Lin showed little remorse for his actions. In fact, some reports suggested he remained cold and matter-of-fact when recounting how he orchestrated the murders, concerned more about covering his own tracks than the lives lost. He maintained a chilling composure throughout the proceedings, showing no emotion even when confronted with the evidence of his crimes. On the other hand, Shui Ping was deeply remorseful once he emerged from the fog of Jiang's deception. It was reported that when Shui learned that Wang Jing's mother he killed was not an evil tyrant, but a completely innocent woman, he broke down sobbing and said he wished he had been the one killed instead. He expressed profound regret for his actions, repeatedly apologizing to the victim's family and acknowledging the irreparable harm he had caused. He struggled to reconcile that he had been used to commit unforgivable crimes. Nonetheless, remorse could not undo the damage, and both men would have to face the legal consequences. In China's legal system, premeditated murder of multiple people is almost certainly punishable by the death penalty or life imprisonment. The fact that 4 lives were taken in such a calculated manner made this a case where leniency was unlikely. Indeed, when the case eventually went to trial, reportedly in 2022, the court found Yang Lin guilty on all counts, branding him the mastermind of the murders and the fraud. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, leaving no doubt about Yang Lin's guilt. Witnesses testified, forensic experts presented their findings, and the digital trail of Yang Lin's deception was laid bare. Shui Ping was also found guilty of murder, though the court took into account that he was manipulated. This could influence his sentencing, but it does not absolve him, since he physically carried out heinous acts. The court acknowledged Shui Ping's remorse and his cooperation with the investigation, but ultimately held him responsible for his actions. By all indications, Yang Lin received the harshest punishment available, a death sentence, for his role in planning and commissioning the killings. Sources suggest this, as authorities emphasized he received his deserved punishment. Shui Ping likely received a severe sentence as well, potentially death or life imprisonment, given the brutality and number of murders. Even though he was deceived, he still was the one who committed the murders. The exact sentencing details were not widely publicized, but officials stated that the criminals were brought to justice and received their due punishment. This implies that the outcome satisfied the demands of justice, almost certainly meaning neither man would ever threaten society again. The sentences were intended to serve as a deterrent, sending a clear message that such heinous crimes would not be tolerated. For Wang Jing, the young woman at the center, who lost her entire immediate family and more, the aftermath was unimaginably painful. In one fell swoop, her father, mother, cousin, and cousin-in-law were gone. And adding a cruel twist, the man she loved and had been about to marry turned out to be responsible for that devastation. The psychological toll is hard to fathom. Reports mentioned that Wang Jing was in profound shock upon learning her fiancé was the culprit. It was as if her entire world fell apart overnight, truly from heaven to hell, as one article described. She was described as being utterly devastated, unable to comprehend the betrayal and the loss. She had lost not only her family, but also her future, her dreams, and her faith in humanity. Wang Jing would have to navigate not only grief, but also the trauma of betrayal. One can only hope she found support from extended family, friends, and counselors in the aftermath. She received an outpouring of support from the community, with people offering condolences, financial assistance, and emotional support. Sadly, no punishment of the culprits can bring back her loved ones or fully mend her broken heart. Her wedding day turned into dates of funerals. The community offered sympathy and support. Many were outraged on her behalf. Wang Jing's tragedy also sparked conversations about online scams and emotional manipulation in China. People asked, how could Shui fall for such a lie? And could something like this happen again if others aren't cautious? The case became a cautionary tale, prompting discussions about the dangers of online relationships and the importance of critical thinking. Law enforcement officials took the opportunity to remind the public of the lessons from this case. As the official statement noted, this case not only brought irreparable pain to Wang Jing's family, but also sounded a warning to society. When facing complex and changing social interactions, we must keep a clear head and sharp insight, not easily believe others' lies, and never be blinded by greed and selfish desires. Indeed, Yang Lin's greed and Shui Ping's gullibility formed a deadly combination. If either one had exercised better judgment or morality, the tragedy could have been averted. Police and media also highlighted how crucial it is to report suspicious activity. Mrs. Jiang and Wang Jing hesitated to involve the police when they received the kidnapping message. A delay that perhaps gave the murderer an opening, though in fairness they were trying to save lives. The case reinforced that when something doesn't add up, like that ransom note, involving authorities early can make a big difference. Luckily, in this situation, the police responded rapidly, once called and managed to prevent further harm. Wang Jing herself could have been in danger if Zhang felt cornered. Who knows if he would have eventually tried to eliminate her as well if his plan had advanced. In the end, justice prevailed. The Shilin Hot 415 murders were solved quickly, and the perpetrators were held accountable. The city gradually returned to normalcy, though the scars of what happened remained in the collective memory. This case is now often cited in Chinese media for its almost novel-like plot, a real-life illustration that truth can be stranger and darker than fiction. It also leaves us with a haunting question. How far can the power of lies push someone? Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. If you enjoy underreported global murder cases like this one, please consider following or subscribing. We'll be releasing 2 new episodes every week, and we're just getting started.